It's the Out the Box Rugby Podcast with André Pretorius and MW Welman.
Welcome to the Out the Box Rugby Podcast. We're doing it in English this week. André, for a reason, there's been a lot of people asking if we can't do this in English because they want to hear what you have to say, because what you're saying is a lot of credibility. So we're going to do it in our best Boer Afrikaans English. So we'll see how this goes. But I think an exciting thing. We want to reach more people.
Yeah, for sure, MW. Good to chat to you again, and looking forward to it.
So I thought today we'd focus on the Bulls versus the Saints for the simple reason that the Stormers and the Sharks sent basically alternative or weaker teams overseas, not expecting to win any of those games. So next time we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into the Sharks, especially after this weekend when they play against the Bulls. But this week the big game was, without a doubt, in the South African context, the Bulls versus the Saints, Northampton Saints at Loftus. Now I want to put that into context. We must realize the Bulls had a lot of Springboks in the side. It's a very strong team. But on the other hand, the Northampton Saints are the defending English Premiership champions. They are by no means a bad team or a team that you can just walk over. The fact that you're just playing at Loftus, so it's going to be an automatic win, isn't it?
For sure. I think the game showed it as well. Saints looked like it was a game of missed chances, and a team that was taking the few chances that they were given, they were taking them, but still the Bulls clawed their way back to 22-21, and it was still anybody's game. I think that just goes to show the quality of the players that was on the field, and I think the fact that the Bulls just got pipped to the line was due to a lot of their own doing.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to talk about. A lot of discussion this week around the way the Bulls played. Very few kicks, lots of running meters, very good attack. Our friend RUGBY specifically mentioned that the Bulls' attack is very good. But once they got into the 22, and you'll give us some of those statistics just now, they just couldn't convert. It's actually quite shocking how many entries they had into the 22, and then they couldn't convert. Tell me about that, and what do you think the reason for that is?
Well, they were trying to play really positive rugby. The way they started, they got a penalty very early. I think that first part was probably could have gone to a yellow card as a deliberate knockdown, as that player was never in a position to actually catch that ball. And they chose to kick to the line and obviously got blown up for double banking. But the Bulls chose to play positive rugby. And I think also, don't fall in love with stats too much. It's very misleading, sometimes, especially with a dominant scrum. When you do get advantage, you'll see the nines work really, really hard to try and get the ball out. Because if you can get the ball out before the ref actually blows the penalty, the team gets two bites at the cherry. And, there's no team that's kicking away an advantage like that. They want to have that two bites at the cherry. They want to have an opportunity to run and see how far they can go until given the second bite and going to the line out of the maul. So that could be a reason. Also, the territory of the Bulls, they had nearly 70% of the territory, which means that they had the ball in certain parts of the field where you probably don't want to kick. But you could see that they wanted to play a positive brand, probably tire the Saints out a bit, but there's still place for it, MV. You still need to pick your fights. Don't overplay in certain areas. And sometimes you need to put the ball in behind if that white wall is just not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made, because that means we were in the right place anyway. We didn't have to kick. So that's why there were very few kicks. And that tells you something about the way the Bulls actually attack when they have the ball in hand. And again, it all goes well until they get to the 22, and then things fall apart a little bit. And you mentioned to me the difference between speed versus shape, and then shape versus speed, or the one or the other. Which one is more important? And that differs to where, depending where they are on the field. Explain to me what you mean by that.
I think it's just important to note first that all attack coaches want to attack with speed. They want quick ball, and they want to beat the onsetting defense before they get into position. So speed is ideal, but rugby happens. So you are going to get into slow ball situations, and then your shape is there to protect your ball and to generate speed again. So for instance, when you get a line break and you break through, you don't want your forwards worrying about getting into pods and getting into shape. Then it's all about speed. You flood that channel and you ensure that you keep the ball alive so that they never get their defense structures back. When they get into slow ball shape, you don't want one-off runners running into brick walls, because that's where the jackals happen. So that's where you need your head runner with, let's say, your primary rucker and your secondary rucker nice and connected. Winning the ruck in the air is normally the best way to do it, because that means that they can't get to the ball, or just being connected in a way where you can get rid of the first threat and the second guy can protect and the 9 can play. And I think sometimes the Bulls get into a position where they run out of shape in certain instances, where they've got one runner going and then they expect people to make decisions and adapt to that. And a lot of the times it's only one guy going, and if your ball carrier is not dominant enough, you run into trouble. And also the ball carrier is not finishing on his own terms, so he's either finishing on his back, on the wrong side, and he has to turn from there. And that's where the jackals occur. That's when your one rucker is not enough. You need that second body, the second player to get in there, add the weight to clean over the ball. And a lot of instances you'll see the Bulls run into trouble with one ball carrier, a ball carrier and just one rucker. And if someone doesn't adapt to that ruck is either slow, or if the ball carrier, Marcel Coetzee showed it a couple of times, where he dominated the collision and the one ball carrier was sufficient. The problem is when the ball carrier is running into double hits and brick walls, that makes the life a lot more difficult for that one rucker.
All right, pardon my ignorance, but just explain to me what shape actually means. I've heard that a lot. I mean, everybody talks about shape, but here I sit and I wonder, what on earth does that actually mean?
So if you think about shape, you want to, the first objective is you need to get into some form of structure where players know where to stand. If you don't know where to go, you're sluggish. You're going to be slow. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to have a shape that promotes ball security and quick ball. So a very, very simple one to explain is just the normal 3-pod, one guy in front, 2 behind, depending on which side the ball comes from. Ball from this side, this will be your head cleaner, or this will be your head cleaner, the outside guy. Inside guy will be your secondary rucker, and that means that you have 3 guys in the breakdown, 1 ball carrier and 2 ruckers. Now a lot of teams play a 2-4-2 where they'll have 4 guys in the middle of the park, and you'll have 4 guys looking after the ruck. The box at the moment play that 4 runners, where they play with the inside guy either goes and assists if it's needed, or he roams around to the next pod and he cleans that pod. So it's more a case of having a bit of structure and promoting ball security and ball quickness.
The fact that the Bulls sort of changed their shape a little bit, like you mentioned, and the fact that the Bulls made so many running meters. I hear what you said about not having to kick balls in our areas anyway, but so many running meters, such a good attack. We're getting back to the old adage of altitude matters, and people are calling for that sign to be removed because it seems to be a bit more of a problem for the Bulls at the moment than it is for the opposing teams. But the point is, do you think this, one-off supporter is maybe something that the Bulls are trying now, a new kind of a shape, something different? Maybe they wanted to run the Saints ragged a little bit, tire them out, the heat and everything. Unfortunately, for the first time in weeks, some cloud cover came over Loftus and the wind picked up just when the whistle basically blew. I mean, I couldn't believe it. But the point is, you mentioned to me in one of our earlier conversations that altitude does matter, but you have to make it work for you. It doesn't just happen automatically that it benefits you. You have to make it work for you. And one of those things to do is running the opposition off their feet. Do you think maybe that's where the Bulls are headed towards? Was that maybe the plan?
If it is, I think defense coaches are going to really like the fact that they'll back a 2-man pod in running into walls, because defense today will pick that up really quickly and they'll see that as an opportunity. My personal opinion is I think they're going into a bit of more of an off-the-cuff structure where if the ball's available, whatever's available on this side, they play that, and the guys need to make decisions. Now, at that level, you can do that. I think at lower levels, it's difficult for guys to make decisions on the run like that. But even on that level, if it's not drilled in enough, if it's not rehearsed enough, it's difficult to do that. And even under fatigue, it starts getting a bit difficult. So I think it's more a case of playing whatever's coming around the corner, and then guys have to see the picture and say, am I needed? Am I not needed? Can I go to the next one? And that's how they're trying to speed up the ball. The problem is you get congestion on one pod and you get isolation on the next, and then you get congestion on the one pod and you get isolation on the next. If you're not having that structure where you know there's a 3-pod and a 2-pod with a back and a 2-pod with a back waiting and guys roaming around. So there's different ways to skin a cat in terms of attack shape. I just think if you tend to run out of cleaners at ruck time, you have to go and have a look at why is your shape breaking down, and then work back from there and give people certain roles where they don't have to think. And especially when the fatigue sets in, that's what forwards want. They want one job to think about once they get there, and they need to do that job very well.
Okay, so that's clearly not a new kind of a shape. So why would that happen then? I hear what you're saying. I would understand. Are the players then maybe a bit too individualistic, going for glory kind of a thing? Or were some of them basically outmatched to a degree? I know the Bulls were very dependent, or have been very dependent, on big, heavy ball carriers. They don't really have that many of them at the moment. Some of them are a little bit lighter, a little bit more inexperienced, especially in the lock bearing. Do you think maybe that played a bit of a role, that the Bulls are maybe a little bit outgunned, maybe in that sense?
Emil, sometimes you have to accept you play as well as your opposition lets you play. And if you look at the Saints, their defense, they had a good defense, but there were still opportunities. The Bulls kept the ball really well, even with 2-man pods and guys not adapting. They were keeping the ball, and then they'd make a crucial error at a vital time. Inside ball to Creel. I don't think he'll catch that 9 out of 10 times. That was unfortunately that's the one time that he didn't. But I think what also happens is on the way you're running around the pod, you're seeing the carry. You anticipate what happens next because your decision's based on that. So you see Marcel carrying and you see Cameron's over there. They should be fine. But now they're running into Augustus and let's say, one more lock, double hit. Now it becomes a struggle. Now you've gone past for the next run. Now you have to adapt from there. Obviously your ball is slow again. So what you don't want to do is that ball, you should use that situation as a platform to get your shape back. Set your shape, get the guys ready, and start generating that speed again and work from there. Just passing that ball off the base without any momentum, you're just setting your runners up for failure.
Yeah, and they kept running into these defenders, like you just mentioned, where there were several overlaps. You just had one more pass. You had Outgunned and MW in a lot of space. You talked to me about where you would head and then, flooding that kind of a channel, but they never did that. Just talk to me about that side of it.
It could be because, they wanted to be direct, but sometimes being direct for the first couple of minutes or let's say first 20 minutes, you're really direct. What starts to happen is the defense starts to narrow up because they want to get double hits. So that little plus pass, that tip pass is on, and where you're getting Marcel running into a double hit, he makes one little pass, and Outgunned van der Merwe is on. He's got a one-on-one with a back or a prop or whatever the case may be, which he can beat. All ends up both sides, doesn't matter, and the collision fight is just a lot more easier going through that door than running into this wall. So I think the variation also needs to be looked at in terms of you be direct, you get them to really narrow up onto your big runners. Big runner starts making that one more pass, and you're running into seams where your offload starts occurring, and also you don't have to use so much energy on your breakdowns because you're getting in behind them, which takes away the jackal threat, and it means that you're getting quick ball and you can play from there. And there you get your speed. And when you get your speed, you're not looking for shape. You're trying to play on top of them and ensure that they keep chasing.
You mentioned Jano Augustus. I was quite interested to see this guy in real life for the first time, and then also how he measures up to Cameron Hanekom, our new sort of eighth man designate, for the future. The first thing that really caught my attention was how big Jano Augustus actually is. He is huge. He's as wide as anything. He's much bigger physically than Cameron Hanekom is. Cameron Hanekom is much more of a lean type of Pierce character. Where Jano Augustus is trocky, he's not called after a truck for nothing. And that was quite an interesting sort of duel between those two. And I don't know who came up on top, but I think Cameron Hanekom, for me, definitely shone. He was exceptional.
It was a great duel. I've followed Augustus for a long time, and I rate him as a player. I think it was a really good rugby duel that. To say there was a winner on the day, I think Cameron got the medal and the hat afterwards, but Augustus had a really good game. Defensively, he was so physical, and he made life very difficult for the Bulls. But Hanekom's one for the future. I mean, the 2 tries that he scored was just sublime, and I think discipline-wise, he just needs to pick his fights more, and he needs to compose himself. I think there's an emotional intelligence that lacks in certain parts of his game, where he gets really emotional and he just gets in off the side. And, it's good intent. It's a really good intent, but you just need to compose yourself so that you don't. I think he gave away 4 penalties, of which 2 I think was holding on. But still, there's still 2 penalties that he didn't need to give away with a foul play.
Talking about penalties in Cameron Hanekom, you sent me a little clip where Hanekom dove into the ruck, and one of the English players jumped like a jack in the box to sort of indicate that he maybe was hit on the head or something. He jumped a meter high. That was quite funny, but actually, from what I understood, that actually turned into a penalty, and it harks back to those days where you mentioned to me that the players are now being coached to lean on the player that's supposed to roll away to sort of force the penalty. Isn't this very much sort of milking a penalty as well? Same kind of thing?
That was a terrible decision in so many ways, MB. I mean, the fact that he jumped into the air. So are you supposed to pull out of the clean when you see someone jumping? That opens up a new can of worms. Then he gets hit with a legal clean, gets put back, and then pretends that he's injured, then jumps up and retaliates. And yet the Bulls still get penalized, and obviously they kick that over, and it just it made the job a bit more difficult from there. But that was absurd. I couldn't believe that decision, because if they're going to start allowing things like that, what's next?
In terms of turnovers, there was a bit of a battle there, ding-dong battle. The Saints scored 4 turnovers. The Bulls had 3 of their own. But that goes back to what you were just saying, not having enough support runners and everything else. But Marcel Coetzee, to me, played exceptionally well. He did, like you said, he made several meters where he just sort of barnstormed the opposition. I think we missed him. He's also quite a big physical guy. We missed that kind of physical presence to a degree in the past with him not playing from the bench, didn't we?
Geez, he's a handful. That try he scored as well. I mean, when he got past that last defender, there was just no stopping him. Very good ball carrier. He's just got to be careful. He tends to overestimate his ball carrying ability, so he stays up high, and he gets out of it. Sometimes he gets out of it. He gets the offload away, but against good defense like this, he got held up sometimes. It took time to get down. He ended on his back twice, I think, after really good ball carries, but because he was running into walls and he started off high, it made him finishing on his own terms really difficult. But he makes a big difference in that pack.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about Marcel specifically is, shouldn't he be the captain? With all his experience, he's got a good history of speaking to the referees and the likes. He's got a good communication style. And he's actually a guy that, he's older than the pretty young Bulls squad. I mean, nothing against Ulrich. He did his job. He did well. But I think, a guy of Marcel's age and experience sort of imposes himself, that just his physical presence, his experience. The younger guys will automatically look up to him. We talked about this last week against Saracens. Marcel would say one word and you're not going to do that again. And the player won't do it again because the captain has spoken. Whereas your friend that you just had a beer with last night may be a little bit more difficult to sort of impose your discipline as a captain. The merits of maybe selecting someone like Marcel or Ruan when he comes back, he seems to have taken a step up since he's come back from the Springboks. We need more experience, I think, in the leadership, in the leader corps of the Bulls.
Yeah, like they say, MV, the guy who runs out in front isn't necessarily the leader of the pack. The Bulls, they are definitely looking at future leaders, trying to give guys exposure as captain, and trying to find the right mold for those guys. I think the nice thing is, even though Marcel's not running out in front, he's still leading. I promise you, he'll be in Ulrich's ear. He'll be in the ref's ear on the right way, not the TJ Perenara way. He'll be in his ear the right way, saying the right things, just planting a seed, walking away. And maybe it takes a bit of pressure off him as well. Although I think he likes being the captain. I think he does it really well. But the Bulls are definitely in a phase where they're looking for the next leader and trying to build that foundation for them.
Yeah, and they need to have this kind of exposure. I agree with you. Yeah. Now, I've said it before, and I said it again last week. I said it. Maybe if you want to do these kinds of experiments, for all the reasons that it's a good idea, maybe do it against for lesser games. That's not as important. But that's quite an important question. How important do you think the Bulls and other South African franchises really see this Champions Cup competition? How serious do they really consider it? Because I'm telling you now, it's a bridge too far, I think, for South African teams. I'll get back to the game just now, but while we're on the subject, I think it's unrealistic to expect South African teams to be competitive in all these games over 12 months of the year without any breaks, having all the challenges of a limited budget, a limited squad size. It's a catch-22, huh? What do you think?
Yeah, it is. We still need to see it as an opportunity. As soon as we run around complaining about schedules and players resting, when we signed that document, we knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. Mm-hmm. And it's still an opportunity for players to play on the top level. And I think Jake said it in the press conference. He said, maybe the South African public still hasn't grasped what this competition actually is. The equivalent of the Champions League in football. And those football players, that's the one competition they want to win, because that's your cream of the crop. That's best teams in the world. And Jake called out a couple of teams that you need to win. Let's say you get La Rochelle, Toulon, Toulouse, or whatever the case may be. It just shows you the quality that's on offer. And then you get these teams that barely made it, that still, it's a challenge to beat them. They barely made it into competition, but yet you can't write them off. So it's a fantastic competition. I understand we've got challenges, but I still think there's an opportunity for us to expose our players to these competitions. And I know it's tough. I mean, we've heard all the coaches say how tough it is, but geez, it must be nice to be part of that.
All right, let's just go back to the game. The defense seems to have taken a step back this past weekend. I know John Teeter's now in charge of defense. It's his first full season in charge of defense, so we must give him some time for things to settle down a bit. And like Jake has said now many times, it's test rugby in club rugby jerseys here. This is next level. You just expanded on that as well a bit. So it's going to test your defense. It's going to test everything. But the Bulls were really poor on defenses. They missed 20 out of 66 tackles. They didn't make that many tackles. They didn't have to make that many tackles. But when they had to tackle, they missed a third of them almost. Now, that's not really up there, is it?
No, and John will definitely not be happy with this. I mean, they were averaging high 80s before this game with the stats that we were given. And like you said, it's not a lot of tackles. And you'd expect them out of 66 tackles to be way up in the 80s. The other thing is, I think there were a couple of setup problems. The try they scored off that line out, they decided not to defend with a 9 for those plays, and then Marcel came running up, and the end of it all, Goosen and Wessels went onto the same man, opened up the space on the outside, and that's how they scored. So, yeah, there's some work-ons there. I think the defense has been good. It's been aggressive. They've had a big focus on trying to make turnovers, which has been good. But I think they'll be disappointed with what happened. And also, the Saints made it look worse because they took the opportunities. They were given one or two and they take them, where the Bulls were given a couple and they just couldn't take it.
I want to get back to this lack of penetration in the 22 or finishing off in the 22, let's call it that rather. What would you have done differently if you were the coach, attack coach now? What would you have done differently? More pick and goes? What would your approach have been to make sure that the Bulls could have converted these plenty of full opportunities of being in the 22? How many times did you say they were in the 22?
18.
Ridiculous. 18
According
times.
to the Opta stats, they were in the 18 times, and
they scored 1.17 points per average on each visit, which is really not good. So, what would you've done differently if you were the Bulls coach, attack coach?
Look, first you have to consider the fact that there were a couple of vital knock-ons at crucial times where. And also, it was unforced, like the one from Creel, the one from Goosen. Goosen was going to score. I think he got white line fever. He looked up. He just didn't finish his catch. He was going to score. The one from Creel, I think that was a good passage of play where the Bulls played same side. Their pods were coming around. They were being really direct, and they played a little play, which I really like, especially inside the 22, because your defense can't really adjust. They get off the line quite hard, so they've got one decision to make. If they make the wrong decision and you make the right one, you run into seams and you get in behind them. And they played a little blocker play. Willie played Krill on the inside, and he was going to go through a nice little seam there, getting in behind. And then if you get in behind them, that's when you get Marcel and those boys, Cameron, running on top of them. No shape, just speed over shape, getting into the holes that they're leaving, catch them offside, get the advantage and then have a go. And then Krill drops that. So the first one is, I think, just the clinicalness of finishing your catch. Like they say, the most important part of passing is catching. So just finish your catch, ask another question. But I also think there were times where the ball carrier or the runner got man and ball together. So, just that flat ball, little needle ball right on the advantage line. And it's a difficult catch, especially against teams that can defend well. So just get yourself a yard or two deeper, ensure that you can finish your catch, and then you can actually make a decision with your feet. You can move to the outside shoulder, move to the inside shoulder if necessary. But, that man and ball catches against a defense that's rushing up in their own 22, that's really deep. So difficult. So that's one of the things, I think, just getting those runners a yard or two deeper, and then maybe, get the backs to pull the trigger at the right time to get those little seams, get in behind them, and then have Cameron and Marcel running into those seams on the wide rucks.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that the most important part of a pass is the catch. There were several fumbled or attempts at catching. Wilco Low, for example, I think dropped 3, knocked 3 on. There were several of those. Those are basic skills errors, almost, if I can call it that. And it's not like the ball was wet or anything like that. Maybe, like you said, maybe they should have just been a meter or two back so they have more time to react to it. But doesn't that take away from the, like you mentioned, the defensive, the attacking shape then, that's where they were supposed to be, and they were supposed to catch that ball anyway? Doesn't that sort of, one play off against the other?
That's a really good point, Emmy, because when they were attacking really well, they play this 3-pod, and the ball will come from this side, and they hit the widest player. And Wilco Low, or it was Steenekamp, who actually got a couple of line breaks through that, and the Bulls looked so dangerous when they were playing on top of them. But the difference is they had momentum, they were getting go forward, and they were playing on top of them. As soon as your ball gets slowed down, it means that their defense is set, and you need to create your own space, because they're going to take it away for you. And you can't be playing on top of them when they're actually advancing and taking away your space. So that's the difference. When they were playing on top of them, hitting Steenekamp on that little seam on the outside, Willie coming around, getting into the edges, hard runners coming, they look like a different team. They just didn't ask the questions long enough for those guys to go, this is a Bulls team that we can't stop.
All right. Other question I want to ask you, the number 10. The Goosen, again, didn't really shoot the lights out. And what was funny for me, maybe I mistook it because I was at Loftus watching it live, so you miss a lot of what happens on the field, and it's pretty low, so you don't really get a bird's eye view. But typically, Goosen and Willie Leroux would sort of interchange. Willie would go 10 first receiver, and then Goosen would fall back to 15, and they sort of alternated. But it didn't look like Goosen fell back like he was supposed to. Did you pick that up?
Yeah. Well, look, are you talking about kick space or attacking with
playing
would get the ball from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult if you get caught in that no man's land area where you want to stay up, ball gets kicked back. This guy's supposed to run it back, he kicks it back, so you might get caught in that no man's land area. What I did find was that when they did alternate, the side that they chose to go to was sometimes lacking in numbers, and Willie got turned over on the one side, on Akker van der Merwe's side. Akker went straight, and Willie kept going lateral, and he got turned over there. But it does happen sometimes that as a 10, where you want to drop back, excuse me, you're not sure what's happening, you stay in the front line, they kick, and you kind of get caught in that no man's land in between.
Yeah, that's what I saw. All right, and then Goosen's form in general, what do you think of the Bulls' strength at 10, with Boeta sort of the backup? I'm not sure where Jaco van der Walt is in the world lately. To me, this Bull team is right there on the cusp of really becoming a very good team. Despite what a lot of people are saying, I think they're almost there, just like you just mentioned, just sort of fine-tuning here or there. It's going to just start clicking suddenly. But in terms of the 10, I think the Bulls have got a bit of a problem that maybe Goosen is not exactly the right guy for that position. Or do you disagree with me?
I won't disagree with you. What I would say is I think there needs to be some form of identity. Now, I use this word a lot, but the thing is, identity has got to do with your philosophy and the way that you want to implement your game model. And at the moment, I can't put my finger on, is he a kicking fly off? Is he a running fly off? Is he putting you into the corners? He's putting you under pressure. Is he flat on the advantage line, getting balls away and putting his backs away on the edges? There's just no identity for me at the moment. And I think with a pack like the Bulls, where direction is crucial and they need to have structure and shape, it's difficult if your 10 doesn't take charge, and it'll come. He's been off for a while, but it's a second game at Loftus. I would have expected just to see a bit more fireworks from him. And, there were a couple of opportunities he had where he just looked a bit flustered, just got rid of the ball, where, I think Goosen from a year or two ago, would take the outside gap or make that pass or, do something in that situation. He just looked a little bit flustered in that situation.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I wanted to ask you about that. He's looks to me from the outside now to be very prone to dropping his shoulders. Things didn't go well. The kick didn't go out where he wanted it to be, or whatever the case might be. That he sort of gets a bit down on himself, and that just sort of carries through to the entire thing. A bit too emotional. I would think that seems to be. Now the question is, Boeta Chamberlain. The couple of times that I've seen him play Currie Cup, especially, he didn't look too bad. I mean, maybe we should give him a bit of a shot and give Goosen a bit of a chance to recover. Like you said, he didn't play for a while, especially with the overseas tours now. Maybe there's a bit of rustiness in there that might, get shaken out very soon. But I want to see the Bulls maybe, building their 10 depth a bit in that sense to make sure that going further, you were a 10 yourself. That's probably the most important positions right after the tight end on the field, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. But they need to find something that works for him at the moment. And if they chop and change too much, especially in that position, it's really difficult for those guys to start stamping their authority on games and start developing that identity again. And again, I'm not sure if when opposition teams analyze the Bulls, what do they say about Jan Goosen? He'll attack you on the blind. He's got a really good distribution game, so we need to have a look. And he will take the gap if presented. So you need to stay on him. Or are they saying, there's not much there. Let's just focus on getting to the outside and covering that. So it'll be interesting to hear what the opposition teams are saying about him.
In terms of the fullback, Willie, Willie's now made it known that he's not going to be staying on with the Bulls. I think he's actually leaving a year earlier than expected. So as I know, he doesn't have a contract. Looks like he might be heading to Bath, but might also end up in Japan again. Does Willie seem to be the same player that he was last season, or is there a bit of a lull there? Am I imagining it?
After our chat last week, I had a bit of a think about this, and Willie, the position Willie plays, it's sometimes easy to give you that perception, and I don't think Willie is that type of player. Willie's a fighter. Willie is very competitive, so I think whatever's been presented to him at the moment, he's just come back from a Saracens game, which I think all of them want to try and forget, and. He was making plans. He was being he had an attacking mindset on the weekend. He had, his tactical kicking, I think, was on par. He was looking at you, and he wasn't just trying to give cross kicks and throw bridge balls. He was being tactical and very strategic. Like I said, that little inside ball to David Creel, I still see that there was such a nice little seam there for him to go into, and Willie takes control. So. No, I'd never go as far as to say, listen, Willie's already on the plane to wherever he's going. He's professional, and he'll see this out to the best of his ability. And, at parts when the Bulls play really good attacking rugby, he's at the heart of it all. He's in the middle of it. He's touching the ball more than anybody in the team. So they're going to need him.
Yeah. I saw again, Jake often talks about Willie's the coach from the field. I saw him on Saturday, how vocal he was, demonstrating with the players, this and showing them what to do. He's got a very astute rugby mind. I think we're going to miss him. It's such a loss for the Bulls, I would think.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. That's why I wouldn't go as far as to say he's already on a plane somewhere. I think it's tough at the moment. You've just come back. You were looking for this win. Now that didn't happen. Now he's needed more than ever now. Off the field than on the field. He's been in these situations, a couple of young players looking for anybody giving them anything to say, listen, this is part of it. This is how we grow. This is how we're going to get out. That's the big question now. It's not how we got here and whose fault is it? It's how we're getting out of this. And when you show good examples, that's how you create really good players for the future and good leaders as well.
I want to just get back to the fact that Jake referred to these matches as test matches in club jerseys. In a test match, you would typically take your points. And if you get a penalty, take the 3. Don't necessarily go for the corner and the likes. But they didn't. That's the first thing. The second one was Jake often talks about the depth of his squad. He mentioned last week before the game against the Saracens, the difference between his number 30 and number 55. If you were to put them in a sort of a ranking order, there's a huge gap. And do you think maybe that lack of depth in the South African franchises is now being shown up by the fact that this is actually Test rugby? That's next level compared to the URC or Super Rugby or whatever. And that maybe that's where the real lack of depth is now showing through. Or maybe not lack of depth so much as lack of experience. A guy like a young guy like J.F. van Heerden is now suddenly playing Champions Cup. 2 years ago, he was still at school. That's a big step up to take for a fairly young player like that. Just talk to me about that side of the Test rugby level of these games.
Well, I like the fact that Jake said that. I would just like to see Jake then coach a test team. Take your points. And that's the other thing. Johan Goosen is a long-range goal kicker. When you get a long-range goal kick, a penalty, take the goal kick. Goosen puts it over, his confidence lifts. You get 3-6-9, you maybe score 1, you go 14, 16, 16-0, 16-5, whatever. And then you start bringing in elements into the equation. And Jake's also one of the best test coaches there is out there. He's proved that the way he puts teams together, and I think he'll take this as a big challenge for his depth. We all know that the depth will be challenged, and you're getting young players into this competition at a very early age. Somewhere that's gonna be very advantageous to these teams, and you need to bite the bullet in certain instances. I still think the Bulls could have won this match. I still think they could have won this match, even with a couple of young players in there, had they taken their chances. The Saints they didn't get as many chances, but they took more of them. But the depth will be challenged, and maybe it's time for Jake to practice what he preaches. I agree. It's Test rugby. We said there's internationals all over the park. Maybe see it that way and get those young players to taste Test rugby at an early stage.
I want to ask you a very blunt question now, and I think it's very pertinent at the moment. Do you think the Bulls have reached their ceiling in terms of this group now, or should they rather just focus on the URC and then forget about the Champions Cup and maybe give their players a bit of rest and use the rest of this tournament, no matter what the European or English press say, and just give everybody a chance to play in a prestigious tournament like the Champions Cup?
I think it might be too early. There's a couple of games left. You can sneak into the playoffs with only a couple of wins. So I think the expectation on the Bulls will be to keep fighting up until the end, not to your own detriment, of course. You want to keep your players as fresh as possible. But Envy, I also think we need to start focusing on the right things. If we keep talking about our depth being challenged, those players hear that. Those players, they get that message and they hear that. So you start doubting number 31 to 55, whatever the case may be. Start focusing on what you've got. Start focusing on opportunities that's on the way. But if we're gonna keep focusing on these obstacles, then that's all you're gonna see the whole time. And I think it's also important the players need to have good experiences in these teams. And look, it's easy for me to talk. I'm not part of any of those teams, but I still think that players need to have a really good experience in those, and just constantly hearing what a tough competition this is, and how tough it is to prepare for these competitions. Then you're going to start feeling that it's tough. So I think that what comes out of your mouth and the language that you use and the visuals that you present is really important, even if it is just for your team dynamics and confidence.
The next question I want to ask is a bit maybe of a controversial thing, but do you think the SA teams are in a bit of a crisis now, being exposed to all these tournaments and having all these expectations heaped upon them? Let's forget about, motivating the players. Let's talk just about reality, money and squad depths and how many players you can actually send overseas, all the traveling involved. Let's look at the URC in isolation. The Bulls have played 6 matches. They've won 5. They've lost 1. They might not have been the most convincing victories, but the point is that one they lost because of the red card. I think it was 23-22. The Bulls are doing well in the URC. So, what's this big hullabaloo all about suddenly about 2 Champions Cup games that went a bit sideways? Especially Saracens was completely an anomaly. I mean, you can't even think about that as a normal rugby game. Yes, the Northampton Saints, they should have done better. There were more expectations. But the point is, do you think the Bulls are in crisis? The Stormers went overseas. They've got so many injuries. They basically almost looks like a high school team. The Sharks decided to rest their Springboks maybe for this big derby match against the Bulls this weekend. I don't think there's too much of a crisis, really. If you look at the URC, where it really matters for us at the moment, I think, except for the Stormers, they're in real trouble. The Sharks are doing well. The Bulls are doing well. The Lions are not doing too badly. I don't think it's too much of a crisis. Do you think? What do you think?
It's the old saying, when you have a hammer in your hand, all you'll see is nails. So it depends on which way you want to look at it. Like you said, the Stormers are battling injuries. Keke Murabe is the latest one. I think the Sharks have just started building that cohesion. They're playing a lot better together. A lot of players putting their hands up on that side. And, like you said, the Bulls have only lost 1. Lions go from strength to strength, still the underrated underdogs that just, keep surprising everyone. So, no, I think it depends on how you look at it and how you want to see it. But there's a lot of positives in there. 1 week is a long time in rugby. I think the other thing is, unfortunately, the one measurement tool that almost everyone uses is it win or lose. And for coaches, there's a different dynamic to it. There's developing players, there's developing leaders, there's developing coaches within your structures. You need to give people an opportunity. And I think what's important for these teams is, it's not the water on the outside of the boat that sinks it. If you let anything inside your circle, that's when you sink it. So, stay in your lane. Don't just look at the obstacles and the negative stuff that we're going through. There's always going to be tackles missed. There's always going to be penalties conceded. But you got people playing better rugby. You get people that's developing as leaders. You got coaches that's taking the step up to the next one, and you're part of that. So, no, definitely not crisis time.
Right, looking ahead this weekend, I think the big game clearly is going to be the Sharks hosting the Bulls down in Durban. Jake mentioned that the press conference is going to be basically the Springboks in black jerseys this time. He mentioned Test rugby, but that's just now not Champions Cup, it's URC again. So that's one to look forward to, and you and I will be analysing that next week still, even if it's Christmas and all the likes, because that's a big game. Now, what do you expect from that specific match? I mean, everybody's going to bring their big artillery, the heavy guns. Hopefully there's not too many injuries. Something to look forward to, and it looks like it's going to be a sort of a sellout crowd as well.
Yeah, it'll be good. Holiday season. I think there'll be a couple of volleys and Pretorianers that'll be down there. So hopefully we see a good crowd. I think the game is going to be physical. I think it's going to be really, really physical. And then on the day, I reckon, it could go anyway. The Sharks at this stage, they've found something that works for them, and also the team looks happy. The team looks like they're enjoying themselves. Obviously, winning helps with that. So it'll be interesting. If I had to make a call, I'll probably call the Sharks just because of home ground advantage. But I think the Bulls will be hurting after Saracens. They'll be hurting after Northampton Saints, and the other thing that we didn't mention is I think the the Bulls cost themselves with a bit of discipline. You know, they on the 55-minute mark, there was a scrum penalty. Then they conceded a not rolling penalty, which I don't think was a not rolling penalty, but Wessels still got blown up. He ripped the ball before they hit the ground. And then Johan Goosen got blown up for a not rolling penalty. And then obviously they took the points from there. So 3 penalties later, from right in front of their post, they get a penalty, third penalty on the 22. So that's definitely something that they need to look at and improve, because that, you know, that piggybacks on each other, and before you know it, you're in your own 22 again. So going to be a good game on next weekend.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hot game, though. I mean, it's December in Durban. I can imagine. Luckily, we're all used to the weather. That's going to be that much of a challenge. But that humidity in Durban, I think, is definitely going to play a role. I think the ball might be a bit wetter because of the, you know, that kind of humidity. It's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a challenge. I think Jake is up for it. I'm sure the Sharks are going to be up for it. I saw Oxenchair just extended until 2028, which I think is good news for them. That team, like you said, seems to be a happy team for a change. That's now sort of galvanizing around Plumtree, maybe, it looks like. Maybe a big season for the Sharks, you know, lying ahead. But yeah, I know who I'll be supporting. You're going to go for the Sharks. I'll go for the Bulls. And next week we'll have a beer about whoever wins the other ones.
No problem. Look forward to it.
All right, Andre, thanks, man. We'll have a chat next week. Thanks for making time. Thanks for, you know, bringing out your best English. You actually put me to shame here. Typically, my English would run out, but I think we did well. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, and we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks. It's the Out the Box Rugby Podcast with André Pretorius and MW Welman.